Welcome everybody to the Best Practices Design Workshop for the Life on State Bikeways study. I will introduce some of our team members, and since this is kind of a small group, I think we can ask yourselves, these attendees, to identify or introduce themselves as well. So I will go ahead and plan to call on folks. My name is Maria Vyas. I am the consultant project manager for the project. Kyle, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, this is Kyle Cook with Salt Lake City Transportation. I'm the project lead on behalf of the city.
Jenny?
My name is Jenny Snyder, and I with Peta Powers, and I am part of the outreach team.
How about Mary?
Hello, I'm Mary Elbeck. I'm with MobiCon, and we are supporting this workshop, the outreach, and the concept designs.
Okay, Justin?
My name is Justin Golding, also with MobiCon, supporting on the design side of things.
Great. Trent?
I'm Trent Thielen. I'm with ZGF Architects, and I am also on the support of the design side.
Okay. Wayne?
Hi, my name is Wayne. I'm with MobiCon, also supporting the project team.
Great, thank you. And let's see, Mike Christensen, you want to introduce yourself?
I am a Salt Lake City resident and also a professional transportation planner.
Great. How about Chad Farley?
I am a Salt Lake City resident and I work at GSBS Architects.
Okay. And then I see a B. Colby. Is that Brian Colby?
Yep, Brian Colby.
Hi, Brian.
Hey, how you doing?
Okay. Great. Thank you all for taking the time to introduce yourselves. So we are going to give a presentation about 30 or 40 minutes, and then we are going to move into breakout groups. And so we're going to spend most of the time in the breakout groups working through some of these different pieces of the life on state that are not actually on state corridors. And then we will do some exercises, then we're going to come back and talk about what we've discussed. Given that it's maybe a small group, this might go a little bit faster than we had originally anticipated. And so I think, Kyle, I'm going to go ahead and turn it to you.
Next slide, please. All right, cool. So we're here talking about the Life on State implementation plan, which is, or I'd say, the latest incarnation of the Life on State implementation plan. So in 2018, Salt Lake City and South Salt Lake were working together with county partners and with UDOT to try and figure out how to implement some improvements along State Street. And what came out of that was this sort of suite or family of projects. And this is what we're showing here on the screen. So there's what we call a catalytic site. There's two of those actually. One is on State Street from 6 to 9 South that focused on streetscape enhancements on State. There's another site in South Salt Lake that's yet to be started. This project is focused, so it's a little bit not intuitive. It's not life on State, it's life on State adjacent. It's how do we, if in 2018 it was decided, well, we're not going to put painted bike lanes on State Street. And while a lot of people disagreed with that decision, we're moving forward with a process that's figuring out how to implement high comfort bike facilities on streets that are adjacent to State Street. And so that's what we're here doing today. This study will run through the course of this calendar year. And we've got some short-term things that are cooking, some long-term things that we're working on visioning. That's what we're going to be talking a lot about tonight, particularly on Main Street and West Temple. Okay, so next slide. Next slide. Go ahead. Great. So this is our study area, and it's kind of a wonky study area. It's got several corridors, as you can see. We're looking, 200 East and Main Street are obviously immediately adjacent to State Street, and so those are sort of natural candidates for what we would when we would be examining how to improve or offer good bike facilities on corridors adjacent to State Street. But 3rd East also has an existing bike facility that has some potential for some upgrades and extension. and also West Temple and South Salt Lake, where they've got some designated bike facilities, are things that we're looking at. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this slide and kind of try and break a couple things down. When we think about this study area, we're thinking about, well, it's not just, hey, can we get some bike facilities? Because a lot of these corridors already have them, right? Main Street has bike lanes, 3rd East has bike lanes. So that's not really the problem at hand. The problem at hand in those corridors is, what can we do to make a next level facility? What can we do to make this more inviting, safer, and also sort of weave in those high quality urban amenities that contribute to a really great urban environment? So that includes walking, access to transit, greening and streetscape, beautification. And of course, oh, don't forget connections to all the land uses along State Street. So let's start with 200 East for a second. So 200 East is going to be, that has some short-term and some long-term, short-term opportunities and some long-term as well. So that section, there's a section between 6 South and 9 South that's going to be resurfaced this year. And that's an opportunity to bring on, or to bring in bike lanes where they don't exist. To the south, south of 9 South, that's a neighborhood street that's got a lot of nice characteristics that make it already attractive for cycling. So as in our bicycle master plan, we have what's called neighborhood byways. And these are streets that don't really require a lot of infrastructure or painting or interventions to make it a comfortable place to bike. The volumes are already low, the speeds are fairly low. What we focus on neighborhood byways are things like intersection interventions, like crossing improvements to make it easier to get say you're riding south on 2nd East, want to make it easy to get across that 13th, 17th, 21st, and so on. So that's a little bit of what we're thinking for 200 East is so some short-term resurfacing opportunities, and then a neighborhood byway to the south of 9 South. 3rd East similarly is getting some is being resurfaced in that similar segment from 6 to 9 South this year, and so we're largely looking at just restoring the bike facilities that are there. To the south, we're also just considering spot improvements at intersections where we can make those crossings more comfortable. So that's kind of 2nd East and 3rd East. What we're going to spend a good amount of time tonight talking is Main Street and West Temple. So these are the elements, the segments shown in red here. And we're going to spend a lot of time on those segments because that's really, as we see, some of the bigger opportunities for a little bit larger scale investment, unlike a resurfacing project that's done sort of on a routine basis to maintain pavement, useful life, and doesn't really have, doesn't necessarily have the ability to like move curbs and that sort of thing. What we're talking about on Main Street and West Temple are visioning for more transformative type projects that could involve more modern designs that are more accessible for a larger range of users. So think of things like separated bike lanes, or even bike lanes that are sidewalk level or behind curb. So let's see, I'm just trying to think if I missed anything before we move on from this. Yeah, let's move on from here. That's a lot, but I think that should get us pretty well oriented as geographically, and then in terms of kind of our focus for tonight, but also some context for some of the other corridors that are on our radar. So we wanted to kind of start this meeting because we're in an outreach phase. We're trying to talk with people from the neighborhoods and the communities that know these areas best. I mean, I've been doing this work for a long time, but I don't live and breathe on these corridors every day and see all the nuances. So we're really leaning on folks, and so we have a stakeholder group that we've convened, and they're kind of what you'd expect: representatives from the community councils, representatives from business districts, local businesses, you know, Bees baseball, for example, and car dealerships, and the SAPA group, and you know, lots of people that are basically operating on a daily basis in the area. You know, some of the things, this is a word cloud that sort of summarizes some of the things that we've heard from them initially. And this really helps frame the way we think about the type of changes that we'd want to introduce along the corridor. So obviously safety is a big one, and that includes all users. That, you know, we've had some really tragic incidents with pedestrians crossing the street and getting killed recently. So in the ballpark area, and so that's, I think, top of mind for a lot of people. So there's cycling safety, but there's also pedestrian safety. There's, you know, some concerns about illegal activities and crime. I think that kind of falls into this safety category. So we're really interested to find ways to, you know, increase the vibrancy, increase the amount of people on the street using the street. That's also a way to combat some of the illicit activities and, you know, deal with sort of that crime issue. Aesthetics obviously are always a big one when we're talking about corridor infrastructure projects. You know, just a couple of other things that I'm looking at my notes from. An intuitive and obvious assignment of space. I thought that was a great comment, and that I think relates a little bit to the safety theme, where we have in areas where we have, you know, maybe not everybody is English as a primary spoken language, and so having intuitive signage and intuitive pavement markings to help just distinguish where vehicles ought to be driving, where they ought to be parking, versus where we have bicycle, pedestrian space, outdoor dining space, making that just as intuitive as possible. A couple of comments related to making this less of a recreational focus, but a focus for you know, utility in terms of commuting, and also just short trips, which are important for some of the lower income travelers in the area that are just getting by on short trips day to day on foot and bike and transit. And an interesting one too, I think, that we're also cognizant of, because one of the key things of life on state is how to enhance some of the retail activities, and, you know, foster a good environment for growth and economic development that's just positive for the whole area. And so, you know, how can we enhance and support retail? That was something that we'd heard a lot about in the context of this stakeholder meeting. Next slide, please. And, you know, we're aware that we're coming into this project. As I said, there's a sort of family of projects, of Life on State implementation projects, and so we're also sort of paying attention to what's been said in those conversations, and we're just trying not to waste people's time or asking the same questions over and over again. So this is a slide that's talking about some of the key takeaways from the catalytic site project that I mentioned between 6th and 9th South. So the focus on this was a little bit different. This was not really thinking about cycling facilities. It was thinking more about what can we do to make a great street, you know, and people talked about in this particular survey, they were talking about Michigan Avenue in Chicago. It has you know, really nice landscaping. It's sort of a wide sidewalk space, very inviting, good lighting, comfortable mid-block crossings. These are all sort of things that people had indicated. And you know, and they're looking at implementing these streetscape spaces either back a curb within the sidewalk space or expanding slightly into parking. So, you know, parking displacement and parking capacity on adjacent streets or even on the adjacent blocks became kind of a topic of conversation. And so that's on our radar, thinking about, you know, if we want to make space on State Street for some nice, some upgrades, but that displaces parking, or we're going to put it on some of the adjacent streets. So that's a consideration. And, you know, I just want to acknowledge too that a lot of people don't agree that bike lanes don't belong on State Street. So that was actually a really common comment in that conversation. And so we've taken note of that. We're not revisiting it as part of this project, but I just want to, you know, acknowledge that that's been said. Next slide, please. And this was a survey from 2018 that was taken specifically for 200 East, and in the section roughly 4th South to 9 South, and what this is kind of the same thing that we're asking now, and so we're obviously trying to make sure we're taking that feedback into account and not asking the same questions. But I think clearly what was said there is, hey, look, this street is super wide given the level of traffic that's on it, and we know that based on the data. We don't need 5 lanes out there. What can we do with that space to make it a better neighborhood street, a better connection for to the downtown area, to the 9th South commercial corridor. And again, parking, does sort of come up, but it's not quite as a hot topic as it is on State Street. So I think, some people were looking as like 200 East as a potential candidate to absorb some of the parking loss on State Street. So, we're aware of that and taking that into account. These next 2 slides, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on. These were just really just giving a nod to another project that's going on. If you want to go to the next slide, please, Jenny. There's the ballpark stationary plan that's going on. And this is, let's see, this is, I think we actually skipped one, but this is South Salt Lake general plan. Anyway, there's a couple different projects that are going on in the study area. We're just trying to pay attention to what folks are saying there. This is just an example of one where, we've got a gap. So the bike lane on Main Street in Salt Lake ends at 21st South. You got the S line 2 blocks to the south of there, and no way to get there comfortably on Main Street. This is the type of feedback that, while we might ask open-ended for our project, we don't have, we can draw from other sources. And so just, to acknowledge that there's a lot going on. There's, we get the sense that there's some survey fatigue out there. So we're just trying to pay attention to other things that are related, and have more targeted conversations like we're going to have tonight. I think next slide. Next slide. That's all I had to say about those surveys and sort of what we heard. So that gives you some background. It also gives you some sort of idea of the foundation on which we're starting and where we're trying to go. So I'm going to pass the mic, and we're going to get into some of this best practice discussion.
Great, thanks, Kyle. Hi, again, I'm Mary Elbeck, and so we've got about a 20-minute presentation for you, and then we'll jump into our breakout rooms. So what we've heard, as Kyle mentioned, we've heard a lot of feedback about safety and an interest in more walkable environments. So we're talking about street design best practices, as the title indicates. And I do want to include in that our approach is not just the best practice for, not just best practices for sidewalks or parking width on a given corridor, but also looking at best practices for how we really integrate both the land use and the street to, to create an exciting space. So we're gonna look at doing that today by talking a little bit about sustainable safety. So sustainable safety is basically the Dutch equivalent of Vision Zero. It's the practical application of preventing injuries or death in traffic. It also has the sort of effect of creating more livable spaces. And it started back in the 80s in the Netherlands. So they've had a little bit of time to learn from their mistakes and figured out what's tried and true. So there's basically 5 core principles of sustainable safety. And the one I want to introduce here is predictability, which is also very much tied to the feedback we got about, creating more intuitive and obvious uses of space. So on the next slide, the way I like to sort of frame predictability from a planning perspective is thinking about setting ourselves up for success by integrating transportation with land use for exactly that, for a more intuitive environment. And this starts to move us away from the idea that the goal is to select the exact same facility type for an entire corridor. If the entire corridor, the land use, the traffic volume, speeds, et cetera, was consistent throughout, then this would make sense and would be ideal. But if it's not, then predictability really means that the bikeway should make sense for the context that it's in. So on the next slide there, let's talk a little bit more about our integrated approach to mobility. So when we think about, one slide back to, yeah, perfect. So when we think about integrated mobility, I think it's often understood more traditionally in the sense that, I can take my bike to the bus, then I can leave it in secure parking or put it on the bus, and then when you get to your final bus stop, then you can either pick your bike back up or walk or take a scooter, or maybe it's as simple as, having one card. Yeah, that's the right one. Jenny, if there's a delay on the slides, that's it. Or having the same card that you can use, to access all the modes that a city has to offer. But on the next slide here, I want to sort of look at this little 4-piece puzzle and say, I think that traditional approach does count as integrated, but we also like to think about integrated mobility as part of a larger system. And so the first thing we think about in the top right corner there are the people. So who's using the space? And then the second thing we think about are, for what purpose, what activities, why do they need to be in this space? And from there we get to the transport modes that are actually ideal to meet the needs of those people and the activities that they're doing. And then lastly, that's when we get to the infrastructure. So thinking about what types of infrastructure and facilities would really accommodate all of these. One way that we like to think about this is that every street tells a story. And hopefully it's a good story and that it's designed to reflect what's going on around it. Streets with the same story as the space around it, they're more intuitive, you're going to get better behavior. And of course, well-behaved road users are important when we're trying to create streets for people. So I like to think with this sort of approach, I like to think about a lot of downtowns with shops and restaurants, areas that should largely feature people on foot or at least moving slowly if they're biking or driving through. But what we see a lot of times is that the design of the road doesn't actually change as it hits that downtown area. It remains 4, 5, sometimes 6 lanes. I'll show you all on the next slide an example, and this is from Lillington, North Carolina. So this is a small town not too far away from where I am. This would be what they would call the heart of downtown. I don't think it really looks like the downtown. It's also particularly hard to tell from this angle the position of someone driving through. But so Lillington it's a pretty quaint, it's a small town, it's a college town. It does have a lot of good recreational opportunities, restaurants and bars, but their main street, it's even called Main Street, is also a truck route. So it has about 30,000 cars per day. And so it's really not very pleasant to sit at any of these restaurants because of the noise pollution. We can see from this street view image that there are sidewalks, but it doesn't really feel super safe or super comfortable. So people actually here, they go to their Walmart they get their steps in at their Walmart parking lot. So here what we see is that there's really, an overemphasized focus on traffic flow over creating a sense of place. And so we can see that there's not a real cohesive story here. So we want to do the opposite in Salt Lake. So we're gonna, we want to get feedback from you all on what the sense of place should be. And then we'll sort of work to fit the facilities and types of traffic into that vision. So Lillington they're still working on their after. They are working on it though, so we'll cut them some slack. But I'll show you all an example from the Netherlands. So on our next slide here, this is a street outside of Groningen in the Netherlands. And if we look at this image, we can see it's definitely quieter and has accommodations for people cycling and walking. But I think the design family here is really for cars. It's still moving traffic. The speed here is probably in the 20 to 30 mile per hour range. We can also see that there's a lot of destinations, a lot of shops and restaurants, etc. So then on our next slide, this is actually the before of this is the same photo, the before of the street. So the city decided that the street didn't quite match, the activity on the street didn't quite match the design of the street. So they redid it. And on our after slide here, and then there we go, perfect. We can see that there's really more of a shared street atmosphere. There's no curb, or a very low curb at least. There's still some separation, but it's clear that pedestrians have a lot more room. They have priority at crossings, and I guess the speed here has dropped more to the 15-mile-an-hour range. So we've got a much more traffic calm environment. There's still some separation, but it's clear that that the focus here is on pedestrians and cyclists. I would suggest that they could stand to make the design a little more interesting, add some more placemaking in there. But basically, from an infrastructure side of things, we're good. So let's see. Let's look at one more example here. So this is Haarlemmerstraat in Amsterdam. This photo was taken in the 1980s. Also has a lot of hotels, bars, restaurants, shops. And what we see from the modes here, the modes accommodated, we've got cars. There's a truck that's cut off from the photo, but it's trucks. There's bus accommodations. There's parking. There's sidewalks. I think there are cyclists in this area, but they're probably mostly on the sidewalks. So anyways, what we can see is that it's a rather car-dominated space. So the city sort of took a good hard look at it and decided that the purpose of people's visits to the area, their activities, were really better suited to prioritizing pedestrian and bicycle traffic. So then on our next slide, we'll see their after, and it's, there we go. Basically an environment that's much more conducive to people biking or walking. The mode here that has the priority are bicycles. You can see there, there's a little red brick bikeway, and then followed by, or arguably equally prioritized, are pedestrians. Again, the curbs between the sidewalk and the roadway are gentler, indicating more of a shared space atmosphere. So those other vehicles, cars and delivery vehicles, are still allowed, but they would be considered guests in the space, and then they should really defer to cyclists and pedestrians in terms of who has the right of way and the travel speed. And all of these design elements and prioritization decisions really lend themselves to a more intuitive or predictable environment and message to road users about how to behave in this environment. So we're not necessarily proposing that all of Main and Temple become a nice brick or cobblestoned street, but we do want to sort of apply that same approach to thinking, starting with the people and the activities in the space. So then on our next slide, I'm going to hand it over to Justin, and he's going to get a little bit more technical in terms of the more design type recommendations. Justin?
Thank you, Mary. I don't know if this slide still has a video on it or if we're running a PDF. Success. Great. So I just wanted to start things off. A little choppy, but I just wanted to start things off with kind of a bit of a reimagination of a street. So I think it's always easy to kind of default to what's there right now, and this is one of my favorite streets to ride a bike on. So I wanted to kind of bring that as a source of inspiration, or an eye refresher as to what a street could look like. So let's move forward a little bit. Next slide. And as we're kind of, this is a bikeway focused project, I'm going to talk largely about best practices in bike design and what helps cyclists kind of enjoy and be safe. And this is some research that has become quite well known, which kind of talks about the ways that what encourages cyclists or people to ride bikes for a variety of purposes. And what we found is that there's a bit of a hierarchy. So safety is at the bottom. So if there's no safety, people won't ride a bike. And then there's a hierarchy of needs. And as you move up, the bike facilities need to be relatively quick. They need to be easy to use. they need to be comfortable, and then at the top of it, they need to be appealing. So 30% of people's responses as to why they chose a specific route is that it's enjoyable and nice. So that placemaking element that Mary was just talking about really does play a big factor into which routes people choose, so long as all of the other factors are also there. Next slide, please. And so when we're looking at the corridors we're considering today, we like to narrow in a little bit on what the appropriate type of facilities are. And so this is a tool that's based on some industry best practices from across the US. The FHWA, both of you are, sound fairly technical, but also international best practices. So today we're really going to be focused on where that green box is. So we're a collector arterial where the speeds currently are 30 miles an hour or above, and really we're seeing that there's a good reason there that we're looking at kind of buffered bike lanes or protected bikeways, and I'll show you kind of some design elements and why we get there. Next slide, please. And it should be one more click. And one of the things we want to really consider is that we are trying to design for all ages and abilities. So as bike facility has progressed over the past decade, let's say, we've really learned that a painted bike lane can be a good improvement from no facility at all. But if we want to accommodate kind of a full range of people that want to ride bikes, then we really want to look to this right side of the spectrum. So either local street bikeways, as Kyle was saying, these would be byways, so those low volume local streets, maybe not what the streets we're looking at today. Protected bike lanes, which is probably likely what we're going to be looking at most importantly, and then off-street pathways, which are relevant in a lot of contexts, but probably not these because we're on streets. Next slide. So in kind of looking at physically separated facilities, I'm going to talk you through a few of the key design features. We're going to have some more detailed descriptions on kind of minimum and maximum widths when we get into kind of the design exercise. But I'm just going to talk about some of the things we might want to think about as we're coming up with some concepts for the corridors. So next slide. Before we get there, I do want to kind of talk about our philosophy in terms of how we organize traffic. And this is really kind of comes back to what anyone that's driven a car or walked through a city would understand, which is that we kind of want to organize traffic from the slowest on the outside, which are people walking or sitting, towards the fastest on the inside. And this is the same way a highway functions as well, with the slowest kind of merging happening on the outside and then towards the middle. And in an urban environment, we separate this into modes. So we kind of always want to keep the pedestrians to the edges where they feel most comfortable and they kind of gravitate naturally. And then the medium speed modes, which are bikes or increasingly e-scooters or other types of kind of that medium speed mobility. And then the cars, trucks, transit in the middle. Next slide. And this applies also to intersection conflicts. So safety, again, being one of the priorities for this project and what we've heard from stakeholders. We can see on the left here an intersection with no dedicated bike facilities, and that big pink zone indicates all of the conflict points. So these are all the places where you could have a problem between a motorist and a cyclist. And then as we move towards the right, you can see a shared right turn lane still has a number of conflict points and a conflict zone, let's say, a roundabout, which we won't deal with today, but reduces the number of conflict points again. And then design features like a protected intersection, which we see on the far right here, which really isolates all the conflicts to one location, which makes it more predictable. So like Mary was saying, for all users, and also just reduces the total number of conflict points, making it safer. Next slide. So going back to kind of the facility design and that idea of all ages and abilities cycling, social cycling is something that we feel is often kind of forgotten, which is that cyclists, people on bikes are people, and by nature people tend to like to talk to each other. So when you're traveling together, it's nice to be able to talk beside the person you're with rather than front to back. So creating facilities that are wide enough, both as cycle tracks and also sidewalks, where people can walk side by side or cycle side by side and have a conversation, is something we want to think about as we're kind of creating these world-class cycling facilities. Next. And another thing to consider is one-way or two-way cycle tracks. This is a big discussion. On the left here, we see a version of a unidirectional cycle track where traffic, bike traffic moves on each side of the road in one direction, versus on the right, a two-directional cycle track. And these both have their advantages and disadvantages. For bidirectional cycle track, if all your destinations are along one side of a street, it can be easier for cyclists to get places, but there's also more safety considerations at intersections that can be a challenge. Next slide. Level or separated. So on the left here, we can see a cycle track where the sidewalk and the cycle track are at the same level with very little distinction between the two. And on the right, we can see that they're separated by a curb. And then there's also opportunity for levels in between. So whether it's a full curb or kind of a shorter curb, these both have benefits. Having them at the same height is helpful in the winter for clearing snow. On the left, having them separated can be helpful for those with visual impairments, for cane detection, or also areas where you've got high pedestrian or bike volumes, just to keep users a little bit separated. So these are some things we'll want to consider moving forward. Next slide. Color and texture are always an important tool to kind of help everyone understand how to use the corridor. So on the left, we can see that the pedestrian zone in kind of that red tan is a separate, distinct color from the cycle track. And then we can also see that at the intersection, the bicycle crossings have been painted or colored a bright green to highlight those conflict points so that everyone has a higher level of predictability when we get to the intersection. And we can see that kind of in a bird's eye view on the right here for the similar intersection design. And using these kinds of features like color and texture both kind of can help create a sense of place, but also just organize traffic and predictability of everyone in a very logical and easy to understand way. Next slide. Transit functionality is obviously important. Pedestrians and transit go well together, and so do bikes and transit. And as we kind of move to protected cycle tracks, how bikes and pedestrians and transit stops interact is an important thing to think about. So we can see here that the cycle track is lower than the sidewalk. So where it connects to the transit stop, it's raised, and there's a level crosswalk there. And there's several features we can use to kind of improve the quality of these connections. But the important thing is that those conflicts between bikes and pedestrians are often well managed, whereas a bike, a cyclist, and a bus is a much more dangerous conflict. So we're trying to improve the situation overall and the experience for everyone. Next slide. So green is good. Getting back to the placemaking, a lot of projects, mobility projects, transportation projects can also become very focused on the transportation lens and forget about just creating large, impermeable, hard surfaces, which can be hot and they have lots of impact. So we're going to try and take as many opportunities as we can to integrate green, kind of nice spaces to add some extra vibrancy, natural vibrancy back to the streets. And there's lots of opportunities to do that, creating cycling facilities. Next. And finally, parking makes a difference. So talking about the facilities and how they move people through the corridor, shouldn't be forgotten that where you want to access destinations along the corridor, cyclists also need good parking facilities. And where you place those is quite important. You can see you can put them kind of between the travel lane and the cycle track, or between the sidewalk. And to the right there, between the sidewalk and the cycle track, tends to often make a little more sense if you can, because you're transitioning from that moving mode to the parking mode and then into the walking. So kind of making those logical transitions for users. Next. And so as we kind of move into our activities and kind of thinking about what types of designs might be appropriate for different points in the corridors, I want to kind of think about some, or present the idea of some design goals for all the modes, which is placing things in restrict, discourage, accommodate, or encourage. So you can think about what the different applications might be for each mode and where you want that mode to be in that corridor. So restricting on the left there, you can see, would be for pedestrians and cyclists. We don't allow them to operate on a freeway. Discourage, in this case for cyclists, would be a facility that's not very well protected, very mixed with traffic. It's not going to be approachable by a lot of people. Accommodate is moving towards what we see as kind of the basics of these all ages and abilities facility types. And then encourage on the right there is kind of that whole suite where you get the attractiveness of the facility alongside of all the safety. And this applies to kind of all modes, and we'll discuss that further. And I will pass it back to Maria.
I will pretend you were saying Mary, and I will take over from here. Thanks, Justin. In a few minutes, we are going to be jumping into our breakout rooms, and we're going to be using a tool called Concept Board to sort of guide us through the activities. It's basically a digital whiteboard. If we were in person, it would be our flip charts that we'd be scribbling notes all over and adding sticky notes to left, right, and center. So this is going to be our opportunity to really get a lot of feedback from you all. Now, what we've done for the first activity is broken the corridor up into different context zones. So really thinking about how the land use is, what land use is happening in the area, what people are doing there, and then kind of going from there in terms of how we want everyone to give your feedback on what the street should look like. And we've sort of developed or it's been made clear that there's kind of 5 different context zones in along this corridor, these 2 corridors. So we are going to, I want you all to pay close attention to these 5, because in a minute we're going to ask you to let us know which context zone you're most excited about contributing to and offering feedback on. This will all be public afterwards, so you can add your feedback to all of the zones, as many as you like, as much as you want, but for now we will need to have you in one of the groups. So the first one on our list here is Auto Row, and this is basically Main Street from 700 to 1300, and as the name entails, this is a corridor where there are a lot of the dealerships, the car rentals, etc. So that's our first one. Our second one is sort of a commercial residential zone. This is where the ballpark is. There's also the sort of Kensington active node there, as well as 1700 South is included in that. So this segment is going to be from 1300 down to about East Coatesville. And so that is our second one. Our third one here is the O.C. Tanner headquarters campus, largely defined by the campus area. And this is from East Coatesville down to 2100 South. And then our fourth one is this one. This one's fun. This is where we jog over from Main to West Temple. And so this is sort of the South Salt Lake City downtown. It's a very mixed use area, some planned developments coming in. So this one is from 2100 South down to I-80. And then last but not least, we have South Salt Lake. And here, this one is sort of a mix of commercial, residential, all types of development in there. So those are 5 sort of key areas. And could we do, let's do a show of hands then. Is that or if people can post in the chat, which one they would like to be in. And you can go ahead and post now. So you've got, let's say, 30 seconds to decide.
Maybe while people are making that decision, just to speak to George's question about this being about State Street or not. George, you might have missed the part where we talked about the study areas for this meeting. Although this is part of the overall Life on State general project umbrella, we are actually focused on creating bicycle corridors parallel to State. So tonight we're focused on Main Street and West Temple. So those are the sections that we are focused on talking about today.
Mm-hmm. And George, I see your question about doing all of them. We're doing breakout rooms because if we didn't, we would be here until probably like 10 p.m. your time and midnight my time. So we're going to go through these in the breakout rooms, but the instructions are the same for each one. So afterwards, you can go in and leave as many comments. We are welcoming lots of comments. So let's see. On our concept board, on the next slide there. So when we get into concept board, it's going to be in 5 columns here, and we'll give everyone sort of a minute to orient themselves. So each column represents one of the context zones. So then we can sort of focus on those columns. This is the example that the stakeholders have contributed to. We've got a clean slate for you guys, but you should also have access to what the stakeholders have done, so you can go in and see their comments as well. And then on our next slide, if we zoom in there, you can just sort of, just to give you all a sense of what it looks like once we're in there, this will kind of zoom in on the map and have plenty of opportunity to leave comments and ask questions and make notes. Like I said, when we get into the breakout rooms, we'll have a minute to sort of orient ourselves. There'll be one facilitator who's sort of operating the screen, so you can just kind of follow along. You don't have to feel obligated to put sticky notes. We can help you do that. Are there any questions on the concept board for the time being? If you have questions, you can pop them into the chat there. And then the second activity, we're going to stay in our breakout rooms and use Street Mix to sort of take that the sort of way we've defined the context zones and kind of translate that into a concept design. So out of curiosity, if you all know how to do the sort of raise hand function on Zoom, I'm curious who has used Zoom before.
I think you mean has used Street Mix before?
Yes, that is what I mean. Thank you. That was a good participation test. Everyone should have raised their hand for the Zoom
raise
question.
hand thing here in Zoom. This is like multi-level.
Okay. All right. So some folks have used StreamX before. That's perfect. So I'll show you all a few examples of what the stakeholder group came up with, just to give you all an idea. You all are going to have the opportunity to do your own, but just to sort of give you a chance to see what they came up with. Ginny, on the next slide. So this is Auto Row, that first context zone we were talking about, sort of our before there, and then on the after, on the next slide, you can see a nice addition of street trees, expansion of sidewalk space, and really sort of a narrowing of the road. And then on the next one, we'll just do one more before and after here. We're still on Main Street here. Here's our before, plenty of space on the road. And then on our after, we can see definitely a very different way of thinking about this street. Again, use of trees as vertical elements and really sort of flipping the amount of space dedicated to cars and pedestrians, so it's much more pedestrian cyclist oriented space. So each of your concept boards has these examples on them, so you can still see them, and we are going to have Jenny send us into those rooms in just a minute here. Let's see, was there anything else? Jenny, if you could bring us back at 7:15 so we can have a few minutes to share and sort of report back, that would be great. And I will, why don't I share my screen with you all so we can just take a quick look at the concept board. Jenny, am I allowed to share my screen? Yes, okay. All right, so if everyone can see this, this is what it's going to look like when we pop in, and let's pretend we are in the context zone 3. So you can just kind of zoom with either your mouse or your trackpad. There's also a zoom function down here. And then if you need to move your page around when we share this link with you, you just kind of grab it with your grabby hand, and you can shift it around that way. And then if you want to make comments or additions, you can do that up here. My favorite function is the little post-it note. Just sort of do a little posty like that and can type away. So like I said, when we get into the rooms, we'll have a minute to mess around with that, but just wanted to give you all a quick sort of orientation on the taskbar and the Zoom function. Kyle or
Mary,
anyone
can
else?
you pop the link for the concept board into the chat?
Yeah, what a great concept. Do that.
I have a question. I'm on my phone for this.
Okay, so I don't actually know that you'll be able to comment directly yourself, but if we're going to be the facilitators, will be doing most of the commenting. So whatever comments you have, we'll make sure they get them in. But you should still, I think you should still be able to see my screen on your phone.
Mary, this is Wayne speaking. Can you make the access editor instead of reviewer? Because somehow I find I can only have reviewer access. Not editing.
Yeah, sorry, I thought you had that access. Let's do that.
I just popped the link for the concept board into the chat.
you
If
just
people
put
want
in?
to pop in there, yeah, while you're figuring out how to get Wayne to be.
Okay, Wayne should be an editor. I'll see that I can make everyone an editor there. So if we want to go ahead and jump into our breakout rooms, are there any questions before that? I think when we first get into our breakout room, most everyone seems to know each other, but it'd be great if we could just do a quick round of introductions in our breakout rooms, sort of your name, and then half to one sentence on why you're joining us here tonight. Okay.
And the plan is to meet back here, right? At
Come back at the 7:15. If you'll bring us back then, Jenny.
Great.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks.
See y'all.
Great. Great work, everybody. Thanks so much for all the comments that I'm seeing posted on here, and sketches and everything. We're excited to see it. So we're gonna do about 2 minutes max per group report out. And if you could just speak to sort of the key activities on your street and how that informed your street mix design, and then any other details that just absolutely can't be left out. We'd love to hear it. So let's start with group 1, auto row. I'll share my screen here, and then you all can speak to this. Let me make sure we're on auto row. Okay, who from auto row is gonna go first?
I can, or I had Chad was in my group today, this evening.
Okay.
So
Go ahead, Trent.
okay. Chad actually lives not on auto row, but nearby over by the library. So he was very in the mix of what's going on, and bike commuter. So we talked about what's happening in auto row, what's going on right now, how things are transforming, and who's using it. We then went through some ideas with that, and then if we're going to go to street mix, right? We did get to our street mix, which is good compared to last time. we talked about maybe getting rid of the left turn lane or using a median in the middle, a planted median, to sort of begin the greening of that and sort of build up the tree canopy, which I think Chad was very adamant about for seeing on like 200 East and things like that, other streets, West Temple, that have that, or near the downtown neighborhoods, and building that up. And if there's making it wide enough that we can have left turn lanes for at the intersections and things like that. One traffic in each way with the parking strip, and then buffering with landscape trees. And then we talked about bi-directional bike lanes on both sides of the street because of the amount of right-of-way we have, and really utilizing that to encourage a lot more, bike traffic in general, because there is such a good width of the street. And then another generous sidewalk furnishing zone with trees is where we put trees at 10, and then carrying the sidewalks widths from downtown down this corridor to I think we're at 10 feet, 10 or 11 feet there. So it kind of really, really transforms sort of the street in right away with, possibly 5 rows of trees, reducing the traffic volumes and increasing the amount of bicycle or, scooter alternative means traffic with the bi-directional. I think that would encourage that quite a bit.
Great. I think this looks great. Thanks so much, Trent and Trent's group. Okay, Wayne, over to your group. Who is, oh my gosh, you guys have lots of great notes. Okay, take it away.
Well, I've been designated to lead this. I think I'll skip over 1 and 2 since that's pretty self-explanatory. We really wanted to focus on a few notes here in section 4, where we need to, for one, complete the 13th South bike bypass. There needs to be better intersections at both 13th South and Main and 17th South and Main, and also better intersection at the Kensington byway system. And street needs to be designed so that it lowers speeds. And also we wanted to highlight that the Parley's Trail segment needs to be completed around Central Point Station and also all the way out to the Jordan River. And in our cross sections, we were, of course, blown away by how wide the street is. And we basically decided to not have regular on-street parking, but have pockets of on-street parking that could be on the right side of the street. It also could be in the center median, and basically that there's an opportunity for a very wide center median that could be used for a lot of different things. And I think that covers most of the main points.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I like your wide sidewalks accommodating the parking pockets. This is great. It sounds like a lot of us were on the same page with the center median, and Trent's group, I promise we didn't copy off of y'all, but it's looking very similar. So we talked about that a lot of the people using the stretch of the corridor are local, and they're going to local shops, restaurants, etc. So we opted for a similar median there in the center, as well as bi-directional cycle tracks on both sides of the street, as well as incorporating some street trees for shade, narrowing the feel of the street, etc. Did I miss anything? Is there anything that you wanted to add?
I think that's pretty good.
Great. All right, let's jump over to the next group then. Okay, here we are. Oh man, y'all work through multiple options. Okay, Justin, who's speaking from y'all's group?
Brian, do you want to talk, or would you like me to go over it?
You can go.
Okay. No, I don't have control of this. There we go. I guess I can. So we basically, unlike the other sections, our right of way was not as kind of generous. So it's a bit more of a constrained situation, but this is kind of a plan downtown for South Salt Lake. So there's a lot of change happening. So we had a bit of discussion about kind of the now versus later and how that's going to shift. We noticed, had a few comments about really making sure that the integration between the S-line connection, which is between Main and West Temple, is kind of like well accommodated, and that there's a smooth transition between the facilities on West Temple and the S-line. And then when we kind of got down into the design, this one on the above is actually from the previous workshop. So we can ignore that and look to the one that we got at the bottom here. And in this case, we went with a bidirectional facility as we felt it was kind of like more comfortable for a wider range of users, and also kind of provided a more consistent approach or connection with the S-line coming from that multi-use trail crossing. Kind of fairly narrow or standard traffic lanes, and then introducing some greenery with trees to kind of provide some shade and soften up the overall corridor. Anything to add, Brian?
Nope, you got it. Yeah, we had some lighting. Yeah, we had buffer.
Yes.
Great, thanks, y'all. Okay, Maria, your group. What did y'all come up with?
Well, we didn't actually get to this exercise as George had to take off early. I think messages that we heard from George were more along the lines of, concern about maintaining the bike facilities that we do have and making sure that debris is removed, making sure that we keep the focus on important facilities like the Parley's Trail, and that we don't lose momentum on projects like that, and that. It's still some concerns that there should be bikes on State Street, which I don't know that anybody here necessarily disagrees with that, but we are where we are. Kyle, anything you want to add to that?
Just I think the reiterating that Parley's Trail connection between Maine and the Jordan River is important, and I think while we're looking at improvements to existing painted on-street bike facilities, that's a great example of one that has a better future than it is today. So we don't want to lose sight of that, and that's a great comment. And I think heard it a couple different places, so we appreciate that. There's also a notion that Main Street in South Salt Lake isn't, well, I guess I would say, deserves maybe more of a place in the bike network than it does kind of now or is currently planned. So that was, an interesting point, and something we'll have to think about more. I think particularly between 21st South and the S line, that makes a lot of sense. Going south from there, I don't know.
Yeah. Great, thank you, Kyle. Well, I also wanted to remind everyone that this concept board will be open, and please feel welcome to keep adding those comments, and you're also welcome to add more street mix design ideas. And that's what I had. Maria, I'll turn it over to you if you want to talk about how we'll be using this and the next steps on the project.
Okay, thanks, Mary, and thank you to MobiCon and CGF folks for helping to put all this together. So where does this go? So this is our opportunity to get some sense of where do people, members of the public, stakeholders, think that we need to be adapting the design of these corridors to reflect the communities around them, people's priorities. So what we want to do with these cross sections, I think the first thing that we're probably going to do is post this online and try to get some more feedback from members of the public so we can maybe hopefully get some more engagement with from folks. But what we'd like to do is develop some prototypes for each one of these different corridor segments or these context zones. So reflecting what we've heard from you guys, reflecting what we've heard from stakeholders, we can start to take a look at like, okay, what should these cross sections be? And then start to have some kind of reality checks around what can we build, what are the costs for the kinds of facilities that we're trying to build here, and then work out some ideas that we can bring back to the public probably early fall. So we will be condensing everything that we heard from you all and providing a summary that'll be on the website sometime probably in the next few weeks, I would guess. And we are going to continue to have some pop-up events throughout the community. Jenny, when's is the first one, the slug event? What's that?
Yeah, that's the first one that we have on schedule. It's the slug, I'm going to butcher the name of it, Kyle, Slug Distillery. My apologies. It's mid-July, but we're planning on being there.
Brewstillery. Don't feel bad. It's a made-up word.
That's why I couldn't get it. Anyway, we'll be there to answer questions. We'll also have a way for you guys to kind of go through a similar exercise where you can kind of put your comments on the board and see kind of what we're doing and ask us questions. And then we'll kind of going to be popping up throughout the summer at events and going to be around. But there's our website. We have similar ways for you to drop your comments there, and definitely be around this summer.
Yeah, I think, you know, we're big picture. Oh, I mean, just to tack onto that, is we're sort of climbing out of the pandemic sort of lockdown, and we're, you know, we're starting to rethink some of the, you know, ways that we've been doing engagement over the last year, and we're really excited to get out and talk with people in person. And so we'll be looking for some opportunities to just get out and sort of piggyback on events that are going on. So just another way to spread the word and make let people, you know, express their ideas.
So I think that's more or less a wrap. Does anyone have questions for us?
Hey Maria, it's Blair. I'm
Hey, Blair.
glad that you guys are gonna take this and kind of like think about it a little harder, because you know, once you get into design, you start realizing there's restrictions of like, where is the existing water line, and like, how tall are the buildings? Can the fire trucks park to be able to get to them? You know, it's like those types of things that take these awesome cross sections during planning and make them not look as awesome by the time they get to engineering.
Yeah, totally. That's a great point. And I'm sure you know from your own experience how that works. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, we appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us today and all of your feedback. And please feel free to reach out to us if you have any further thoughts, and continue to add your thoughts to the concept board as well. Share it with your friends. And with that, we'll let you go. Thank you, everyone. Have a great
Thanks,
night.
y'all.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Night.
See ya.
Thanks.